What's going on, everybody? It's Brandon and I'm back, and this time I will be discussing my top 10 favorite movies of 2018. This is the first time ever that I've seen enough movies to make a top 10 list, and I'm really excited to discuss them and tell you guys what I thought about them. Like I said, I did see a lot of movies this year, and unfortunately they all couldn't make my top 10 list. So first, let's discuss some honorable mentions. The first movie on my honorable mentions is Overlord. And this movie isn't a masterpiece or anything, and it's not trying to be. What it's trying to be is what The Meg should have been. Right from the get-go, this movie draws you in with what might be the most intense first 15 minutes I think I've ever seen. And there are some great action sequences, both gunfights and people fighting the zombies, if you can call them that. But overall, this movie was just a really good time. Up next on my honorable mentions is the Queen biopic, Bohemian Rhapsody. This is a movie I went into with some skepticism because I did read what critics were saying, and they were saying it wasn't very good, and I personally was very excited for this movie, so I was hoping for the best. This wasn't the greatest movie I've ever seen, but it was really good. I think my biggest problem with Bohemian Rhapsody is that there are some historical accuracies here and there, and I do like when movies are historically accurate, but they didn't totally take me out of the experience. But there is a lot of good things that do happen in this movie, particularly Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury. Wow, was he good. I wouldn't be shocked if he got nominated for Best Actor at the Oscars in a couple months. Other than that, my favorite parts were easily the performances, but particularly the Live Aid performance, which made me feel like I was a member of the audience, and I loved it so much. The next movie on my honorable mentions is Pixar's latest entry, Incredibles 2. Now, Incredibles 2 did get some flack because people said it wasn't as good as the original, but if you went into this movie expecting it to be better than the original, then that's more on you. But I love this movie. It was very fun. The action sequences are very well done. We get to see more superheroes that we didn't get to meet the first time around. But there's also some really interesting commentary, like about the news and how they control what you see, and people's attachments to their smartphones and how they need to be glued to a screen 24/7. This movie got surprisingly deep, and I really enjoyed it. Coming up next on my honorable mentions is Damien Chazelle's latest masterpiece, First Man. This movie tells the story of Neil Armstrong, the first man to ever set foot on the moon, and the United States space race with the Soviet Union to see who gets to the moon first. Now, I will say this movie is not for everybody because it is a little bit slow in some parts, but it does pick up. This movie is also a really good history lesson. I learned so many things about Neil Armstrong and this mission that I didn't know before. The CGI was really good, the music was great, and just the presentation overall was fantastic. I felt like I was really watching a movie that was made in the late 1960s. And these next two movies I love so much, and they just missed my top 10, but they still deserve some recognition. And the first of those movies is the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And this movie was like just the feel-good movie of the year. It tells the story of Fred Rogers, you know him better as Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and it tells the story of his life and the making of the show and how the show became to be, its popularity. And I will say, I'm not afraid to admit it, I did tear up a little bit. This movie was so good, and in these divided times we live in, this is the kind of movie everyone needs to just bring us all together. And the last movie on my honorable mentions list is Mandy. Now, Mandy is another movie I will say is not for everybody because it can get pretty strange at times. This movie stars Nicolas Cage as a man named Red who is seeking revenge on this cult for killing his girlfriend Mandy. And the movie just gets crazy from that point on. The first hour is a little bit slow because it's just building everything that happens, but the second half of this movie is some of the most fun I've had watching a movie in some time. This movie is also much funnier than I thought it would be, and I think it gave me what might be my favorite line of 2018.
And you should go in knowing that your odds ain't that good, and you will probably die.
Don't be negative.
Pure gold. Well, that's it, guys. Those were my honorable mentions, movies that I loved this year that didn't quite make the cut, so why don't we move on to my top 10 favorite movies of 2018. Coming in at number 10 on my favorite movies of the year is a movie that I did not think I would like as much as I did, and that was Game Night. This movie really surprised me with just how funny it was and just how action-packed it was and just the creativity as a whole. There are so many creative shots, particularly these aerial shots of neighborhoods, which is presented in a way to look like a board game. It was just so beautifully done. Coming in at number 9 on my list is A Quiet Place. This movie might be the single most unique experience I've ever had at a movie theater. Because if you've seen it, you know that there are long periods of time where nobody in the movie is talking. No one in the theater was making a peep. Well, except one guy behind me who kept going, He would have died several times if he was in this movie. But I almost felt as if I was being disruptive just trying to eat my candy, because I'm pretty sure the entire theater heard me. And I really can't say enough about the actors in this movie. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt both kill it. And John Krasinski also kills it as the director of this movie. I really cannot wait to see what he has in store for the future. Coming in at number 8 on my list is Bo Burnham's directorial debut, 8th Grade. This movie really captured what it was like to be in 8th grade, especially in this day and age. There's some really good commentary about social media and teenagers specifically and their hunger for society's validation and approval. For instance, the main character Kayla makes these YouTube tutorials giving life advice, but she doesn't really seem to put the advice that she gives into practice herself. And I think that's a really spot-on way of portraying social media in this day and age. Coming in at number 7 on my list is the newest Spike Lee joint, Black Klansmen. Spike Lee takes a very serious subject matter and presents it in such a lighthearted way that it makes this movie a lot of fun. It knows when it needs to be funny, and it does know when it needs to be serious as well. There's some really strange editing choices that really distracted me and kind of took me out of the movie at some parts, but I'm willing to forgive all that because the movie was genuinely hilarious and it was a really interesting story that needed to be told. At number 6 on my list is Bad Times at the El Royale. This movie takes all these characters that wind up on this hotel that's right on the border of California and Nevada. More and more you start to realize who they are and why they're there. Every character gets their chance to shine and you know so much about them. It's really impressive that this movie was able to fully flesh out all of these characters in just 2.5 hours. I know that seems like a lot of time, but it really doesn't, considering how many characters there were. There's a lot of scenes that are a lot longer than they need to be. Like, they just drag on. You're like, okay, we get it. Can we get going? Can we get on to the next scene? And there's some really interesting commentary about the moral ambiguity of the decisions between right and wrong. And this movie was phenomenal. Okay, we've reached it. My top 5 favorite movies of 2018. Coming in at number 5 on my list is A Star Is Born. This movie was very powerful. Great performances by Bradley Cooper, Lady Gaga, Sam Elliott, and Bradley Cooper really knocked it out of the park directing on this one too. It also really nailed the portrayal of Hollywood and the music industry, and the original songs in this movie were all really, really good. I can't wait to see what Bradley Cooper directs next if he does continue directing. Coming in at number 4 on my list is a documentary that really surprised me. I thought that Won't You Be My Neighbor would have been the best documentary this year, but no, it wasn't, because it was replaced by 3 Identical Strangers. This movie is a documentary that tells the story of these identical triplets that were all separated at birth. At first you think you're getting this very feel-good story of these brothers that came back together after being separated for most of their life, but as it keeps going you learn more about who they are, why they were put in the families that they were put in, and why they were separated in the first place. It gets really, really dark and mysterious by the end of it, and it just keeps you begging for answers, and I really wanted more. I really wanted this movie to be much longer than it actually was, because it was just that good. Coming in at number 3 on my list is Avengers Infinity War. Here we are, 10 years of world building, and it's led us to this moment. Boy, was it worth it. This movie was able to take every character from the past movies and just blend them together so well. It was so much fun being able to see them interact on screen with one another. It still has that great mix of Marvel humor and tragedy. Thanos might honestly be the best supervillain ever put on screen. And oh my god, oh, that ending. I was not prepared for that ending. This movie was number 1 on my list for a really long time, and I didn't think anything would top it. but that was until these two. At number 2, we have Searching. Searching is a very simple missing person story. John Cho plays a father who's trying to find his daughter, but what makes this movie unique is that it's presented in a way that everything is shown from the perspective of a screen, whether it be a computer, a phone, or a television. It's all shown from the perspective of a screen. Now this worried me a little bit because that is the same way that the movie Unfriended was presented, and that worried me because I really didn't like that movie at all. You could tell this movie was made by people who understand the internet, how people interact on the internet, how the internet works. The cherry on top was when John Cho is told his daughter has a Tumblr account and he types Tumblr into the search bar with an E. It's little things like that that showed the filmmakers really knew how the internet works and how other people see it. And coming in at number 1, my favorite movie of 2018 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I knew this was my favorite movie of the year because as soon as I was done watching it, I wanted to go watch it again. I did go into it with a little bit of skepticism because Spider-Man isn't really a stranger to disappointment. But this movie was phenomenal. The animation style, the characters, the action, the soundtrack. Oh my God, this soundtrack is fantastic. It really is refreshing to see a Spider-Man story like this put on the big screen. The relationship between Miles Morales and Peter Parker is so well done. All the characters in it are great, and when the other Spider people do get their moment to shine, they steal the whole scene, particularly Nicolas Cage and John Mulaney as Spider-Noir and Spider-Ham, respectively. Where is it? There he is. See him? Look at it. This movie was hilarious, it had heart, it was emotional. This might also be the greatest Marvel post-credit scene ever made. So that's it, guys. Those were my favorite movies of 2018. What was your favorite movie of the year? Comment down below because I'd love to know. Do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree with my picks? I'd love to hear that too. Other than that, I hope you all have a great new year, and I will see you next time.